Professor, in the last hour we were talking about, all these things having to do with the vote this morning and what Jeff Flake is up to, and Lisa Murkowski saying, no, enough already, I'm a no vote, which means it goes to basically Joe Manchin and Jeff Flake. Jeff Flake saying is a yes vote. Susan Collins is going to announce this afternoon what her vote is. But, and we'll get back to this stuff in just a minute. I mean, we just did a whole hour on it. But on the line with us right now is Professor Richard Wolff, our old friend, the economist, the co-founder of Democracy at Work. Democracyatwork.info is the website. And his most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
I understand you've been traveling around the world. Have you learned anything you want to come back and share with us?
No, I spent Wednesday evening giving a talk at Penn State University, and I hadn't been there before, but I want you to know that the audience was wonderful, and the interest in the kinds of things I have to say, the only word I can say is gratifying. And active students who want to change the way this country is developing was a real pleasure.
That's marvelous. I must be mixing you up with another one of our guests because I thought you were in Europe for the last week. In any case, the Republican tax scam. We had a conversation with David Stockman about 6-8 months ago, in which he was suggesting that because the Republicans just jacked our national debt by $1.5 trillion, the Fed is, or the Treasury Department is going to have to float $1.5 trillion worth of notes, of IOUs, of treasuries, and that if there's not a lot of demand for them, that they'll have to offer a higher interest rate in order to get people to buy them. And sure enough, the interest rate seems to be going up. And that when that happens, people are going to look at treasuries and say, why should I be in a risky stock market that's, long in the tooth when I can instead get a guaranteed 3% return? I'm just going to move my money out of the market and into the bonds. And when that happens, the stock market collapses, and that would all be a result of the GOP tax scam, and it would probably start in October, which is this week. And because this is the first week of the fiscal year when the federal government has to float all these loans. Does all that make sense, A? And B, do you agree with Stockman, or is he missing something, or what?
What Stockman is doing here, and what he often does, is to present a scenario. Is it possible that things will develop the way he said? The answer is unequivocally yes. Is it certain that this is going to play out in the way he suggests? Then the answer has to be unequivocally no. It depends on so many variables that can go in God knows what direction, that predicting is, as usual, a very dicey proposition. Let's go to the first part of it, though, which I think in a way ties together many things. If the United States, as it has done, cut taxes on corporations drastically from the 35% to the 21%, as it did last December, and saves corporations huge amounts of money that they paid in taxes, and at the same time, because they couldn't have got it through Congress otherwise, they increased, although modestly, government spending, then, as you put it, they're going to have to borrow huge amounts of money. Well, on the one hand, they're going to have trouble doing that because some of the biggest lenders to the United States government, in particular Russia and China, are not going to be doing that in the way they've done in the past. In fact, they're cutting back. And my guess is they will do a good bit more cutting back, which means they may have some trouble being able to float those bonds without offering more and more interest rates, which will have the devastating effects that you described. So I think people should keep that in their mind, that it's not only the tax cut that this crazy administration rammed through when it wasn't an appropriate thing to do, but it's the combination of that with their disastrous foreign policy maneuvers that may be a 1-2 punch that'll knock out the American economy, and we will be talking about that for a long time. But let's suppose one last point. Let's suppose that doesn't happen, that somehow the federal government of the United States will be able to borrow this immense amount of money that it has to because it cut its own taxes, mostly on corporations and the rich. What people need to understand is that The only way the government can pull this off, especially if Russia, China, and so on cut back, is by borrowing from corporations and the rich inside the United States. So here's the irony, and if you understand this, you understand so-called high finance. The government cuts taxes on corporations and the rich, and then turns around and instead of taxing them, borrows the same money from them, having to pay them interest every year for a bunch of years, and then returning the money to them. That's why corporations and the rich like this kind of maneuver, because they save on taxes and basically substitute a profitable interest-bearing loan to the government for the money they used to have to the government in paying taxes. It is a stupendous subsidy to them.
And all the rest of us pay the interest.
Absolutely, and have to come up with the money to pay them back, as those bonds mature that they have in their hands. That's why they go for this kind of thing.
Now, the other point that Stockman made was that if interest rates were just to go up a point and a half, that the interest on a national debt of 22 trillion would exceed what we're spending on the Pentagon right now, which I think is $600 and change billion. And that when that happens, I mean, that'll be a psychological threshold, if nothing else. And by the way, that's more than we spend on all our domestic programs, our discretionary domestic programs combined by an order of magnitude. And that when that happens, there will be such a hue and cry about the unsustainability of the debt in the United States. I mean, Pete Peterson on steroids, although he's passed away, that the people will demand that the Republicans prevail in destroying Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, long-term unemployment insurance, all these other so-called social programs. I would say that they maintain a democracy, a society, a functioning society, but that people will demand that these programs be replaced or done away with because people don't want to be saddled with this enormous debt. Now, that's been the Republican talking point since 1960, but they're still doing that dance, and I think what he's doing is previewing Paul Ryan's strategy after the elections. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. I think that's the logical thing for them to have to do. Now that the pretense that they care about a deficit is exploded by their own decision, I think that's what we can expect. I think one more dimension that perhaps Stockman didn't talk about is that because of the crash of capitalism back in 2008 and the decision of the Federal Reserve to drop interest rates virtually to zero in the 10 years since, every corporation that wanted some free money to borrow to try something it thought might work has borrowed that money. Every third world government that needed the money to survive has borrowed at these low interest rates. And they now have to pay the rising interest rates as the Federal Reserve jacks up the interest rates. That puts countries like Argentina, Turkey, Indonesia, and a whole bunch of others in an impossible situation. They cannot carry and service the debt that they have accumulated. And the result is those countries are plunging into the kind of mess you could see already in Turkey and in other countries. And that, too, will play its role in disrupting global arrangements and so forth. To pretend that this is all under control of Mr. Trump and his environment is so silly that it's kind of hard to take seriously, but they're trying manfully to act as though they're in charge of all of this and that the economy is healthy. We have a debt-ridden economy that is less sustainable and more fragile than I've ever seen in my life. Wow. A grim reminder of the reality that has been brought to us by Reaganomics and the two Santa Claus theory, et cetera. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by. My pleasure. Thank you, Tom, and have a good weekend. Thanks. Yeah, you too. Have a great weekend. It's always good talking with you, sir. Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info. You can tweet him at Prof Wolff, PROFWOLF.